All right. Thank you for joining us today, everybody, to talk about retirement planning in the aftermath of a pandemic. So, obviously, with all the stuff going on, people are really, really concerned about retirement. I think some of the primary concerns they have are, can I still retire when I was planning on it? And a lot of people are asking, can I even stay retired if I had just retired recently or a few years ago? So, we're going to talk about all of the potential changes that have been coming down the pike and also some of the key factors that people should be keeping in mind based upon the changes in the financial and economic environment that have been created by this pandemic. And also, we'll talk about what we can do in the future to help insulate ourselves from other like major unknown or potential changes that could happen that we might not have any control over. So we are fortunate today again to have one of our key speakers. He is one of our real financial experts in retirement planning. If you have not heard of this gentleman before, if you've not listened to one of his workshops, I highly recommend that you seek him out or seek out his educational courses. He is the head of our Houston, Texas foundation operations. He runs and for many many years has been running one of the most and largest successful college planning practices in the country. We have dubbed him the $47 million man. Not only has he been helping students across the country get non-needs based scholarships and things like that, but because he's helped so many people, thousands upon thousands of people, this wave of people that he's counseled have now sort of been going into the retirement planning phase of their lives. So he has become truly expert in how to transition from what we call the growth phase to the distribution phase. And then we'll talk about the distribution to the conservation phase for some of our clients who are listening that may have already been retired and are concerned about their estates getting chewed up by taxes and eroded away by the government. But anyway, I wanted to really welcome today Brannon Lloyd from Houston, Texas. Brannon, are you here?
I am, John. Thanks for having me.
All right, it is my pleasure. Thank you for being here. And your in-person workshops and your webinars are almost always the most highly sought after for people that come to the foundation for advice. And I know this is a topic that is on a lot of people's minds, so I wanted to get it out there. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today, Brannon, is more about controlling what you can control so that you can help maybe even alleviate some of your own anxiety. And Brannon, have you found in the past that people have just kind of been focusing on potentially the wrong stuff and focusing on things that they really had no control over, which is why they've been so uncomfortable, apprehensive, maybe even stressed out about retirement planning?
Yeah, we're talking to a lot of people who are very stressed out now, Jonathan, without a shadow of a doubt. And a lot of it is because they feel like they can't control anything, right? With the pandemic, with the stock market doing what it's doing right now, a lot of people just feel like, I've done this planning, I've thought about this for the majority of my adult life, and now everything has come unraveled. And it doesn't have to be that way.
And it's a horrible feeling, and I know sometimes when people look at the stock market nowadays, they see it going up and down on a daily basis, but there's no real rhyme or reason to that. So if somebody has their entire retirement life based upon what the stock market does, of course they're going to feel out of control. But I think our
Absolutely.
mantra, and Brannon, you know this mantra, right? Our mantra has always been and always will be, we don't try to show people or ever guarantee people how they can make more money anywhere. Our mantra has always been, we show people how to keep more of the money they make. And how
Exactly
is
right.
that
Exactly
and
right.
how has that been able to help you create better retirement lives for your clients?
Well, it just allows you to focus on what you can control, right? So when someone starts with us, I point out to them that I can give you a perfect financial plan if you can tell me three things. If you can tell me what your returns are going to be, and if you can tell me what taxes are going to be when you retire, and if you can tell me how long you're going to live, I can give you the absolute perfect retirement plan. And of course, nobody can give us any of those three things.
That would be very useful information. Let me
Very
go ahead and
useful information.
let me go ahead and do our disclaimer, Brandon, then we're going to just jump right in. So again, if you haven't ever gotten a chance to deal with Brannon, he runs basically our entire Texas chapter, headquartered out of Houston, but he does fly all over the country. We've flown Brandon to all corners of the U.S. and he's come out to DC multiple times, and he does counseling. He has a very robust and amazingly talented staff out there, and they are all accessible for you guys if you would like to use them for counseling. College planning was definitely how the college money guys. Am I allowed to tell a little bit about your organization, Brannon?
Oh, sure. If you'd like it, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean the college money guys. I love the name, number one, but number two, when we look at college planning, when I researched it and I was really trying to find people to, sort of flagship our college planning programs, I really wanted to see people that were not just based upon, hey, how do you fill out a financial aid form? I wanted to find people that were creative and had some ingenuity involved to show people techniques that not everybody knew about. And the fact that you guys were able to just get so much scholarship money for your students. And I know this isn't a college planning thing, but Brannon, would you just describe for me what I love to hear from you, which is the one thing really when it's just the most common misconception about college planning. The one thing is everybody thinks that if you make too much money, that you cannot get any awards for your kids. If you make $300,000 a year, or if you make or have too much money, that college plan isn't worthwhile. Can you just, before I jump into this, Brandon, if people haven't heard you before, can you explain that to us? Because I really love to hear that.
Well, yeah, most people believe that the schools are looking at their finances, and if they make too much money, they're just out of luck. And what we've found is that the affluent families, and when I say affluent, I'm using the federal government's standard, right, of making over $120,000 a year, which, again, if you're making $120,000 a year, you probably don't feel affluent. But all the way up to, we have clients that make over $1 million a year in our college planning practice, and they all, when they hear me speak and I tell them that it doesn't matter how much money you make, that's really not the driving factor behind offering students merit-based scholarships, they're surprised. And then I further tell them that, believe it or not, your child's grades and your child's SAT scores or ACT scores don't really have very much to do with it either. That's when it kind of stops them in their tracks. And the reason why I started doing that practice, because I have a financial planning background. I've been doing it since I was 27 years old. But more and more I saw people sacrificing their retirement funds to pay for their child's college education, and it's just not necessary to do that. So that's what our practice is built on.
And then so now you're helping people transitioning who maybe their kids have already gone through the college thing, and now you're dealing with these baby boomers that are all retiring. And we're going to talk today, about how the pandemic has changed the scenery of, retirement planning out there. But I would say to you that the number one sort of mistake that people have made, and they're all getting it. I mean, the light bulbs are going off on their head. But the number one mistake that I think people have been making is they've been deferring their taxes too much.
That is the hugest mistake we see, and it's very, very common.
All right, and we're going to talk about how to avoid that and how to fix the problem, because taxes are definitely going up. So if you guys are watching this, let me just go ahead and hit my space button. Okay, the disclaimer. If you guys have been to our workshops, we really appreciate you guys listening in. However, we want to remind you that we are not making any actionable recommendations or giving you advice through these workshops about the stock market or any related investments. These are truly educational only, and we highly recommend that you seek out a licensed professional in your jurisdiction to getting advice or actionable recommendations for things like insurance, tax, legal, real estate, college planning, retirement planning, and things like that. All of our guys like Brannon are volunteers, so we are incredibly grateful for all of them, but we do not endorse and we are not owned in part or whole by any type of individual or organization. We are purely nonprofit, and please do not take any of the information as actionable recommendations for you guys. Please seek out the advice from a licensed professional. All right, so we're going to go through a pretty big list here, Brannon. And of course, the first one is taxes. The second one is inflation. Historically, these have been the biggest, what we call eroding factors in retirement. Now everybody's talking about volatility. So how much can those, let's just call that the big three, right? Death, disability, fees, opportunity costs. We'll touch on these things, but between taxes, inflation, and volatility, if we took just the big three, how much of a difference can that make in terms of somebody's retirement planning if you know how to accommodate for those things and you plan around those things versus if you don't know how to focus and really plan your retirement to take those three things into account?
Well, Jonathan, it's the difference between having a happy retirement and not outliving your money and maybe having to go back to work or ask your kids for money in retirement. Bottom line, it's just that
So
simple.
it's like game changing, and I think inflation has been so low, and taxes have been so low. I mean, historically, Brandon, what kind of environment are we in right now, where taxes and inflation are concerned?
Well, they're as low as they've been throughout history, at least in recent history in our country, right? And one of the things that concerns me going back to the pandemic is that we just printed essentially what, $2.4 trillion, and that money is going to have to come from somewhere. And so I don't think inflation is going to be as low moving forward as it has been in the past, and that becomes critically important, right? The example that I always give is when I first started dating my wife, we could go out to dinner and actually go to Chili's or someplace like that and get an appetizer, a couple of sodas. We could buy popcorn, the whole 9 yards, and I would have to go to the ATM, which were brand new at that time. Right? Didn't quite trust them.
You're dating yourself, Brandon.
I know. But and I could pull out $20, and that was plenty.
Yeah.
And now to do, well, she won't let me take her to Chili's anymore, right? We have to go someplace nicer. But she, in order to do that now, I've got to pull out $80, 4 times as much money, and that's inflation.
Yeah, and so I'm going to show everybody out there some inflation calculators when we sort of get to the actual retirement planning sort of suggestions that we're going to have them take a look at. But I like to tell the example, Brandon, of taxes, because the tax brackets that are existing today, and we're going to go over those tax brackets as well. People don't realize how good they've got it, and
They don't.
there's only one way for our government to raise revenue, right? I mean, taxes. I mean, they can issue bonds, I guess. But historically, they needed to sort of fix all of our social programs, and this pandemic recovery program is definitely a social program. The way to pay for those has truly been through increasing taxes. So it's not going to be a very favorable move for whoever's in office when taxes go back up. But right now, taxes are already set to sunset, Brandon, right?
Right. Yeah. At the end of 2025. So in January 1st of 2026, we'll wake up. If everything else stays the way it is right now, we'll wake up in 2017 tax bracket land.
Yeah, which is definitely higher than we are right now. So, Brandon, I know you work with a lot of people now handling their assets and designing retirement plans for them. Do people really understand how much volatility can truly affect their retirement, and how important is it to really understand that?
Oh, it's tremendously important, right? One of the things that a lot of advisors are just waking up to. In fact, I speak to advisors all over the country that and about their practice and about some of the gotchas that are out there, and the idea that if you retire into a declining market, you have a much higher chance of running out of money is something a lot of advisors have never even heard of before. But volatility has a huge effect on your ability to retire.
And you know what, Brandon? I am going to pop up a calculator because I'm glad you brought that up. And let me just close this out for a quick second here. And I do have a calculator that we use to quantify that idea. What do we call that, Brandon?
That's our,
the random return calculator.
I'm Jonathan Buck. So yeah, the random return calculator. I was thinking it was the sequence of returns calculator. So forgive me.
No, it's the same thing. So right. So most people have never heard of sequence of return, and you just basically described what sequence of return is. But what I wanted to show people is we actually have a calculator that can show people how much of an impact this idea of sequence of return, Brandon, can have on their retirement. So in your like experience, historically speaking, how much have people typically been advised to withdraw out of their retirement accounts to sort of ensure that they never run out of money? What has sort of been like the magic number that, hey, if you take out X amount a year, it's a pretty safe bet that your money will last forever?
Typically you'll hear an advisor say if you are growing your money at 5% and you're only pulling out 4%, you should never run out of money. That's the prudent man rule.
And mathematically speaking, that should work out. But let me show you, Brannon, why it doesn't. And you could explain this idea to people, right? So I just like to pull up actual historical numbers here to show people, a period in time where we had really, really great years and really, really bad years. So this shows all the way back from 1999 to 2014, Brandon. And what I wanted to show people is if you do, and by the way, let me just highlight this before we go into anything else, because you said the number right. If you can earn 5 and take out 4, your money should last forever. But Brandon,
Yeah.
I just highlighted these returns, right? The actual returns that I'm showing you, and the average over this particular period was 5. It's 0.051. The average over this period was 5%. And so I'm doing what you're saying here, Brandon. I'm earning 5 and I'm taking out 4. But in the first half of my retirement life, I just lost 40% of all my money.
Yeah.
What happened?
How's that possible? Well, that's because it's an average 5 and it's an actual 4. So, if you look in 1999, you pulled out 4%, but you got 19.51. So you actually ended up with more money than you started with. But the very next year, the market declined by 10%, and you pulled an additional 4% off that. You're actually down by 14%. And so the problem is that you're basing your retirement increase, the growth of your money, on an average rate of return, but you're calculating the withdrawal of assets for living expenses on an actual percentage, right?
So people need to understand it. People, and that's
Yep.
why they come to you, Brandon, right? Because you can show them what the difference is between actual rate of return and average rate of return, right?
Exactly. Anytime there's a negative involved, anytime the market contracts, your average rate of return is going to be lower than your actual rate of return.
And let me go ahead and I'm going to hit this random button, Brandon, because what I wanted people to see is most people out there don't realize this, Brandon, but they're leaving their entire retirement life to chance based upon what they call these random returns. So let's just click this random button, and you'll see here the actual numbers didn't change, but this negative 38 that happened in 2008 now, it just switched. And the negative 10% that you just talked about in 2000, the numbers themselves didn't change at all, but the sequence changed. And so every time when I click this button, I mean, this would be fantastic, Brandon. If we could guarantee people from this point forward for the next 7 years, they would have double-digit returns 5 out of the next 7 years. Look at the difference.
Huge difference, $200,000.
Yeah, that'd be huge. But what's the likelihood that we're going to get, these types of returns over the next 5 to 7 years? Probably not super high. And what is the possibility? I'm going to click this a couple more times, and you'll see here every time the numbers are different. And I can click this, by the way. I click it 1,000 times, I'll get 1,000 different answers. Again, this would be an amazing sequence. I mean, my gosh, if we could do this, nobody would have anything to worry about. But unfortunately, once in a while, we get one of these, where you lose half of all your money, or you lose 60% or 70% of all your money. What people don't realize, and I'm clicking this a lot of times so people can just stare at these numbers for a second, you get a different number every time. And there's no way for us to predict what the stock market's going to do, what the volatility of that market's going to do, and what this sequence of return is going to do to their money. So what is the easiest and quickest way to understand, Brandon, what somebody can do to ensure that they don't have this potential of dipping into a huge percent of principal? I'll just stop. Won't do one more. I'll stop during their retirement life while they're taking their money out of their accounts.
Well, if you can get into some kind of a volatility control situation where you're not taking those huge losses, that's a tremendous help. In fact, it would be key to making sure that you never outlive your money. Right? Having some kind of a floor, some kind of a guarantee on at least a portion of your assets that they can't lose value but continue to grow, that's huge. And that's one of the foundations that we use in my practice to make sure that our clients don't have to worry about outliving their assets.
So let's say somebody does come in to see you, Brannon, and let's say they're able to put it into place a really terrific tax strategy, and they're able to have an inflation-adjusted income. They have volatility control like you're talking about. But what if these guys die prematurely? What if they get disabled? What if fees and expenses really start to eat away at their accounts? Gosh, what if interest rates start going up? How many plans out there that you have seen before somebody comes into your office that have really taken into account all of these macroeconomic factors?
Very few. And I don't think it's the fault of the individual advisor so much as the fault of the industry for not really training them. What I've found, and I know you've found the same thing in your practice, is that advisors are really good at gathering assets, right? And they're really good at growing assets, but they're terrible when it comes to the distribution side of those assets. They don't fully understand the tax consequences moving forward. They don't understand how inflation works. A lot of advisors don't even understand how the fees and expenses work inside the products that they're recommending or the strategies that they're recommending. And so being able to educate the public and educate advisors on these very, very key factors that can literally make or break the client from a retirement standpoint becomes tremendously important.
All right, that's really, really great insight. Brannon, would you mind talking just for a few seconds about tax rates and for people just to understand, what type of tax calculation can they do right now to figure out how much tax they're going to have to pay, and then maybe Brannon, how they can project out potentially where they're going to be tax-wise in retirement?
Oh, absolutely. So the first thing that you have to understand is the way the tax code works in the United States. Because when I talk to a lot of people when they're coming in and meeting with us, they say, well, I'm in a 24% tax bracket, and I say, okay, well, what does that mean? And they look at me like I'm stupid, and they say it means I pay 24% on my income, and it's not necessarily the case, right? So I have to gently remind them that actually if they're married filing jointly, right, the first almost $20,000 that they earn is only taxed at 10%, and that surprises them. They don't understand the way you kind of slide up the tax scale, if you will, in the United States when it comes to your federal income tax. And so, as you can see right here, with married filing jointly and surviving spouse filings, the tax code gradually increases. It goes from 10% to 12% to 22%, 24%, and that determines how much room they have, if you will, to earn before they move into the next highest tax bracket. And by the way, just as an aside, being in a 24% tax bracket and making $300,000 a year, that's unheard of. I mean, the very first job I had way back in the 80s, I made pretty good money coming out of college, and I was in a 30% bracket. And I think I was only making like $30,000 a year, which was good money in the 80s, right? But still, being in a 24% bracket and able to earn $300,000, most people don't realize what a boon that is for them in retirement planning, right? So one of the things that we're looking at with our clients when we're talking about taxes and their effect on retiring comfortably is just how much do you think the government's going to reach in and grab from your government-controlled retirement accounts, right? Your 401ks, your IRAs, anything that is deferring taxes into the future or has a required minimum distribution associated with it, or even a pension, is tremendously subject to how much the federal government decides at that time you're going to owe them of your hard-earned money in the form of taxation, right?
And Brannon, I think we can also point out that most people have sort of thought, well, gee, my taxes are going to be lower in retirement than they are now, right? But
right, I hear that all the time. Well, yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say in Houston and here in Maryland, I think our incomes are probably similar on average, but in where we live now, the average person makes about $70,000 a year while they're working. The average couple makes about $150,000 while they're working. Right. So they're in this 22% bracket. But what's the chance of this couple making $150,000 while they're working? What's the likelihood that they're going to go down in bracket and make less than $80,000 while they're retired to go to that 12% bracket?
It's not likely. Most people that we see have been working their entire lives. Their Social Security alone is going to bring them somewhere around $50,000 a year in income. And so just a modest reduction in their retirement assets to fund their lifestyle is going to put them well over 80, probably closer to 100 or 120. Most people that I talk to, when I say how much money are you going to need in retirement, they're giving me a number that's in the 100,000s. And when we revert back to the old tax law, which I know we're going to talk about in a moment, it's quite likely that they're going to be much higher than a 22% bracket.
Right, because this is if the taxes don't change from where they are right now. But we know, the tax reductions are going to sunset in just a few years here, And so we want people to know that all these brackets are going to be going up. So if they're going to be paying higher taxes in the future, Brandon, than they are now, what should they be doing?
They should be paying their taxes now, if possible, without a shadow of a doubt.
And so how do they
taxes
do that,
are on
Brandon?
sale?
Yeah.
Well,
so how do they pay taxes now?
Well, by getting money out of tax deferred accounts and paying the taxes on that money now and putting them into something like a Roth account where they won't be taxed on any future growth, right? We call that a backdoor conversion. Most of the people that I meet with, a vast majority, make too much money to actually open a Roth account and contribute, $6,000 or $7,000 to it every single year. What a lot of people don't realize is that the federal government has given us the ability to take money from a tax deferred account, pay the taxes on the money that we're withdrawing now, and then put it into a Roth account using a backdoor conversion and never pay taxes on that growth again.
Okay, so that backdoor conversion is a great idea, and not a lot of people know about it. I think one of the key things we wanted to point out here is anytime you have money that is deferred, whether it be your 401k, your SEP IRA, your TSP with the government, your 403b as a teacher, once you reach a certain age, Brandon, you can convert those, right? And there's no income limitations to do that.
That's correct. No income limitations whatsoever, right? And more importantly, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, I know as well, no required minimum distribution once you've done that. And that can make or break you from a tax standpoint right there.
All right, that's really good information. What I'd like to do now is I want to talk a little bit about the millionaire next door, Brandon. So, you and I are not that far off in age, so we kind of grew up in an era where if I had told you, Brandon, that you would have $1 million in retirement, what would you have said to me?
Oh man, I'm set. I'm gonna be easy. It's not, I'm gonna buy a yacht, right?
You're a millionaire. It just seemed like an unbelievable amount of money.
Millionaire, right? Yeah, exactly.
Well,
it really did.
Let me just pull up. I'm just going to pull up a very simple piece of paper, actually, and I want to show everybody. This is $1 million right here, right? And under the prudent man rule, Brandon, that you just mentioned, remind us again, how much money should we be taking out of our $1 million to help us ensure that 4%. We're not going to run out of money? 4%.
4%.
So if we do this at 4%, then that equals $40,000, right?
$40,000. Yeah.
Now, most people that are taking out this money, where is this $1 million parked right now, Brandon?
A lot of it's in a retirement account.
So I mean, realistically speaking, let's say, after this tax code sunsets, what type of taxes should we be expecting to pay on this $40,000?
$40,000, probably somewhere around 18%, maybe 12, but probably closer to 18%.
Gosh, you guys in Texas, you don't have state tax either, do you?
We don't.
I'm gonna round you. I'm gonna round you up to where we are in Maryland, including the this 5.something6% state tax. So I'm gonna subtract the tax. Right, and again, this is their marginal bracket, Brandon. So this is going to be taxed on top of Social Security, on top of their pensions, right, if they have any, on top of whatever other income they have. So after that, then we're talking about maybe $30,000 minus the tax that's left. So that's their net. Doesn't sound too horrible, right? I mean, it's okay.
Right.
I mean, if you're talking about a millionaire who's living on $30,000 a year, I mean, what comes to mind?
Trailer parks.
So let's do this.
You've got to have all your bills paid off, right? You can't have at that point, you shouldn't have a mortgage. You're probably not taking great vacations. You're definitely not helping your grandkids with their college education. Those types of things, right? And then, as you're showing on the screen, you've also got to factor in inflation in that, right?
So what is inflation going to do to somebody in 15 or 20 years? Or what should we really expect based upon your experience, Brandon?
Well, inflation currently devalues currency by about 50% every decade, right? So in 10 years, your 30,000 is only going to buy you roughly $25,000 worth of.
Well, if it devalues by 50%, it'll be 15,000, right?
Per decade. That's right. 50% per decade.
So
that's right.
Well, you're right. So you're talking about per year, but let's just say somebody who's 65 and we want to fast forward to when they're between 75 and 80. Let's move them forward 10 to 15 years. And what you're saying, Brandon, is after inflation, their net is equal to about $15,000.
$15,000 worth of purchasing power. That's correct.
So what's wrong with this picture? I mean, this is a millionaire we're talking about, a person who's got it made in the shade with a tremendous amount of wealth, and they're feeling like, you know, at 75 years old, they're feeling like they've got $15,000 a year of buying power from their $1,000,000. What's wrong with this picture?
Well, it's not enough, right? People think $1,000,000 is a lot of money, and in reality, if you're not going to touch your principal, it's just not enough, right? This is why eliminating taxes, fees, expenses, all those things become so tremendously important.
So our goal in life doesn't necessarily have to be let's try to grow their million, Brandon, right? Our goal really should be
exactly.
let's try to show them how to sort of negate some of these eroding factors so they can keep more of their own money, because that is an unbelievable amount of erosion that I'm looking at. It's an unbelievable amount. So let's go ahead and pull this back up. All right, and talk about why tax shelters are so important. So we talked about the Roth. What other types of tax shelters are available for people?
Well, there are strategies using things like trust that can offset the amount of money that they're paying in taxes by generating charitable deductions. There are tax-free vehicles that you can put money into that grow at a nice, good, steady pace, and you never pay taxes on those earnings. And there's a number of different strategies available to just the common person who may be thinking, well, I don't have access to all these things because I'm not sitting on $20 million. And in fact, one of the beautiful things about the foundation that you started, Jonathan, is that it brings these strategies and makes them accessible to the common person who's just worked all their life, and now they have some retirement money, and now they need to live off that money, and they're not quite sure what to do.
This next slide, Brandon, I'm going to try and pull the presentation back up. And so this next slide that I really want to just talk about for a second here, it really worries me because of the pandemic aftermath. I think these numbers are going to be changing. And, I don't think most people are surprised, Brandon, by the fact that, maybe a third of your income may be coming from Social Security. I don't think they're surprised by the fact that maybe 20% of your money is coming from pensions, and I also don't think they're surprised by the statistic that their investments might drive 9 or 10%, and some people obviously in retirement are going to be on welfare. What I think they're going to be surprised about, Brandon, is that 32% of people in retirement are never going to stop earning. What does that mean, Brandon, and why should that be such a huge thing?
It means they're going to work until they die.
That doesn't sound like a successful plan to me. If I've got to work until the day I die, I essentially never got to retire.
You never got to retire. And you can see the evidence of this in the workplace every day, right? If you go to places like Walmart or Costco or Sam's, where you see people that you would think, well, they should be retired and enjoying their golden years, and instead they're having to work because either the market has taken away their money, or they didn't realize how much they were going to pay in taxes, or inflation has just overcome their ability to earn off of their retirement investments.
So if a third of their money is still going to potentially be coming from their jobs and they can never retire, I feel like we've sort of failed as a country, because we have a system. Yeah, I mean, we really have a system, Brandon, that is designed to succeed with information. And I also believe, Brandon, that's one of the reasons why you and I exist, is to educate people about this information so they don't have to work. And I can only imagine how much stress a person has, Brandon, if they know that they can never retire, and how that must make them feel.
That's got to be, I can't imagine being in that position. It's the monotony that you're facing, the lack of hope that you would have, just knowing that every day is going to be like the last. Now, I've met people that have come out of retirement to, pursue their dream careers, and I think that's fantastic. And if that's a choice that they can make, wonderful. But if they don't have a choice and they're just having to get whatever job they can get in order to survive, that's misery, in my definition anyway.
That's a great point. If you love what you do, then that's a great point, Brandon. Then it's fantastic. But if you don't, then we want at least to be able to give you the option of not having to work till the day you die.
Right. Or being able to take little mini vacations or mini breaks, mini retirements, as you will, and go travel the world, go eat at that restaurant that you've always wanted to eat at, and share with friends, that type of thing. That's a successful retirement. Not having to go 9 to 5 and punch a clock and really have no choice.
So, Brandon, I believe, and I know you have too since we've talked about this, but I believe it is just as important for people to have a budget in retirement as they do while they're working. And a lot of people don't do that. But, I mean, it's just as easy if you're smart to pay down debt and pay down your mortgages potentially, right? Because paying off stuff means you're freeing up cash and you have less overhead. But why is necessarily a shorter term mortgage not always the best idea for people?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. The number one reason that I always point out when I'm talking to clients about their mortgage strategy is you can pay for a 30-year mortgage in 15 years and the bank doesn't get upset with you. Try paying a 15-year mortgage in 30 years, however, and see how the bank reacts.
Right. That's a good
So
point.
it's all about cash flow. And retirement planning is a lot about cash flow. That's why a budget becomes so tremendously important. And when I say the word budget, I can always see the slight cringe or maybe the locking up, because it's such a restrictive word in the United States, right? When we talk about budget. But point to me a successful company, point to me a successful organization that doesn't have a budget. And it's not so much restricting what you can spend your money on. It's really more telling your money what to do, right?
Well,
Understanding that this here, and it's like marching orders for your money is what a budget is.
yeah, that's great. So directing your money to the most efficient and well thought out places. I think that's a really great way to explain it to people because I do think budget has a negative connotation. And I've seen you do projections, Brandon, where somebody can keep their 30-year mortgage but make the 15-year payments and actually pay their house off even faster if they want to, and it just gives them
Even
more
faster.
flexibility. Yeah. All right, so let me go ahead and just jump around a little bit more. I want to just have you touch on the estate planning. So the pandemic has changed, the way that people look at estate planning, right? Obviously, it's said to people, hey, you need to have an estate plan, right? What do most people consider an estate plan to be, Brandon?
Most people just think if I have a will, I have an estate plan.
Right.
And that's
And
just
so,
not true.
yeah, and so should you have a will? Absolutely. But what is the sort of the end goal for actual estate planning, and why do people really need to look at it?
Well, I think the end goal for estate planning is being able to pass money on, well, protect yourself, right? Especially towards the end of your life, but also being able to transfer the wealth of your family to the next generation without having it raided by the federal government and the state government.
Right.
Well,
So we're really talking about sheltering your estate, not running out of money for yourself, being able to protect your life savings and be able to protect your assets from things like long-term care, from things like taxes and probate. But there's some incredibly powerful strategies, Brandon, that most people wouldn't be able to do on their own. Trusts, for example, insurance sheltering, for example, maybe even different gifting strategies. Most people don't know these things are out there, and most people are afraid. I mean, quite honestly, Brennan, they're afraid to talk to people because they think they're going to have to pay a ton of money to somebody to give them counsel, or they're going to have to hire a bunch of lawyers to do this for them. But through our foundation, Brennan, that's absolutely not true, right?
absolutely not true. We have volunteers working at the foundation that completely understand the ins and outs of estate planning. They know the tools that are available, and the foundation makes those tools available at little cost or sometimes no cost, right? So, and the most important thing is that they can come in and not be made to feel stupid, right? That's one of the things that I hear a lot is, I don't want to go talk to an estate planning attorney because I don't understand this stuff at all, and I'm afraid that I'm just going to come across as ignorant or stupid. And that's no reason to go. I mean, it's the foundation for financial education, right? Education is available on these, and we're never going to look at someone who asks us a question about estate planning and be like, "Well, geez, I can't believe you don't already know that," right? That's why we exist, because we know people don't know these things.
And Brandon, I know that the way that you conduct yourself and the way you run your office is, I know you treat everybody the same. And so I want people to know that whether you have $100,000 to your name, or whether you have $1 million to your name, or $10 million to your name, everybody gets treated the same. And we really want to give everybody access to the same information. You don't have to be wealthy to get really, really great advice. And I think it actually might be more important for the people that are just maybe more on the edge and more teetering on the difference between a comfortable retirement versus a potential blunder because of the taxes and inflation and some of the stuff we've already talked about, how important it is for them to basically seek out some type of professional counseling from people that are not just interested in the growth portion of their lives, meaning collecting more money and having you invest more money, right? The
Right.
three major institutions, Brandon, that we talk about, we're talking about like, banks, we're talking about insurance companies, and we're talking about brokerages, right? They are all after your money. But how many of those people, Brandon, if you look at the banks with all their financial tools, you look at Wall Street and the brokerages with their investments, and you look at the insurance companies, how many of those of the three major institutional organizations in our country, how many of those organizations actually make money when people distribute money back to themselves? How much money do they make when people take money out of their accounts and spend it? And how are they incentivized to help people do that?
Right. And the bottom line is they're not, right? The brokerage industry, they get commissions if they're commission driven, regardless of whether the client is putting money in or taking money out, right? Because you have to do a transaction and that transaction generates a commission. But for fee-based type advice, for fee-based structures, insurance companies, banks, brokerage firms, they're financially incentivized to keep your money. That's bottom line, right? And so I suspect it's one of the reasons why the Secure Act, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, raised that required minimum distribution rule from 70.5 to 72, because it lets the banks and the financial institutions hold on to your money a little bit longer.
And there is a tremendous lobby from those three major financial institutions, obviously, to continue to be able to get people to give them money on an ongoing and regular basis, build the value of those accounts, and not distribute that money back to people. And that's what we want. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that's what we want people to understand, that there's not a whole lot of incentive for any type of financial institution to teach you the best way to take your money out.
That's right. If you go, I say this to people all the time, go onto your television, go to your local cable provider or your satellite provider, and look how many channels there are devoted to accumulating wealth and growing wealth, and then show me the channel that talks about distributing wealth. Where's the wealth distribution channel on the cable news network? There's not one.
Doesn't exist.
You can't go to the estate planning network. There's no such thing.
So, Brandon, I know you talk to your clients about not just how and when to take money out of their different accounts, but also the specific strategy in the order in which you take things out and how to sort of leverage the proper accounts against each other. When is the appropriate time for people to start thinking about this kind of stuff?
Well, we recommend they start thinking about it, coincidentally, around the time you should start thinking about it when you get a job, right? I've counseled all three of my children now are in the workforce. We have successfully launched them. And I'm telling them now, look, you need to be maximizing the amount of money that you're saving towards retirement. Right? You don't need a flat screen TV on every wall of your house. You need to be focusing on how much of your money every single year you can put back and save for a rainy day or save for retirement. So I think it's important to talk about it early on. We actually have been in business long enough that we're working with students now that we helped through high school, helped get into college, helped get money for college, who are now starting families, and they're coming back to us and looking for this type of advice. But certainly, once you get between 10 and 15 years out from retirement, you really need to start thinking about preserving some of that wealth, making sure that it is protected from volatility, those types of things. And I mean, you've got a really good list of things here from an exit strategy standpoint. But I would say that you should really get serious about your retirement planning no later than 10 years before your intended retirement date.
And, if I had told you, Brandon, if I had told you a year ago, oh, gee, Brandon, people are going to be standing outside of Harris Teeter, standing 6 feet apart with face masks on, what would you have told me?
Well, as you know, but those on the webinar don't know, I used to live in the Soviet Union back when it was the Soviet Union, and that's what it reminds me of. People in the Soviet Union, people would just go get in line because there was a line. They didn't even know what was at the end of the line. They just knew it was going to be something they needed because people were lining up for it. And now I see people lining up in this kind of queue fashion here, and it reminds me a lot of that. I would not have believed you. I would have told you that you were crazy.
Now, I remember, I'm actually glad you mentioned the Soviet Union, because I do remember some statistics when there were food shortages. Do you remember, Brandon, what the inflation rates were historically in a single day in those types of environments?
Oh, sometimes it was 1,000%. I
Yeah,
mean, you would
isn't that
literally you
incredible?
would go to bed one day and you'd wake up and your money would be worth half or a tenth of what it was worth when you went to sleep. It's
So
unbelievable.
in the sort of global pandemic world that we live in, the rules have changed, guys. Nobody can tell you what's going to happen. Nobody can forecast anything for you. And those that do and are telling you they can, look at the stock market and forecast the economy, shame on them because they can't. All we can do is prepare. I mean, that's really the idea. All we need to do is educate ourselves and equip ourselves with the best possible strategies because nobody knows what's going to happen. There could be a recurrence of the pandemic. There could be some, international global crisis. There could be a nuclear event at some point in our lifetimes. And these are all these things that are, again, 100% out of our control. And we shouldn't be up at night or working until the day we die if we have a plan that we know we can have. It's not going to be the perfect plan, but at least we'll cover all of our bases and have a strategy so that if something that happens, that's tragically out of our control, it doesn't mean just pure devastation for our entire financial lives and our lifetime worth of savings. So that's really kind of the key element of what I wanted to, have Brandon have you talk about today. Is there anything that you want to add to that in terms of, planning in the aftermath of a pandemic, Brannon?
Just really quickly, a couple of things that I think a lot of economists are missing. I've only heard a few people talk about this, and I've done some research on it myself. People that are going to be relying on Social Security really need to rethink their plan at this point because we've had a sustained period of time now where no one is actually the current projections for Social Security. The trust is supposed to start a decline. I believe it's 2034, and for the last 3-4 months now, we haven't had with the labor force being what it is, with unemployment being where it is, we're not contributing to Social Security right now at all, right? And so that people, even if it ramps back up and everything is fine in the future, that year of lost earning, if you will, affects how much money people are going to be getting in retirement from Social Security. And so looking at what you can control, because you can't control your Social Security, right? But looking at the things you can control and putting a plan in place to minimize the effects of all these other eroding factors that we're talking about just has become just that much more important in post-COVID-19 world.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brandon. I would like everybody to know that they may want to rethink their Social Security strategy because of what's going on in the post-pandemic world, as well as some of their other strategies. I think that's a really great point. Hey, let's just kind of close off here, Brandon, and talk just a few minutes about the Secure Act. The Secure Act kind of went into place very quietly, literally 2 months before this pandemic outbreak, happened in our country. But the Secure Act really is going to have a major change in the way people inherit money from their parents. And with the baby boom generation being sort of IRA savers, all their money is saved in qualified and retirement accounts. Number one, how is that going to affect, and what has the Secure Act done to people that are already, saving and stashing so much money in retirement accounts?
Well, it's going to almost assuredly mean that they're going to end up paying more in taxes.
Conventional wisdom told us, Brandon, that hey, put money away now and pay less tax later. But
right,
you just showed us.
It's just not true.
That's just not going to happen. It's probably the single biggest misnomer in the world of finance, right? Let me go ahead and stash cash in my retirement account so I can take it out of the lower bracket. And as you just said, it's not true. The other really, really common misconception, the Tax Reform Act that created the retirement accounts in the 1970s, 1973, I think it was, they created the 401ks and they created the 403bs. These savings accounts didn't exist before. And I'm going to kind of catch you off guard, Brandon, put you on the spot. I don't know if you remember this or not. Do you remember the original purpose of the formation of the 401k plan? Do you remember what it was designed to do? Do you remember what it was titled, like what a 401k is actually called?
Yeah, it's a defined contribution plan, and it was really meant to provide tax relief to highly compensated employees. It was never intended to be a retirement vehicle for the everyman.
And guess what, Brandon? Where is the number one place that people have been saving their money for retirement?
401ks.
401ks. And And we'll talk to people and say, look, you know, what is your match on your 401k? And they'll say, oh, it's 5% or 10%, or sometimes it's no percent. And then we'll say to them, well, if why are you putting so much more than you're getting matched? And what do you think the most common answer to that question is, Brandon?
So I can save money on my taxes.
Yeah, they think they're going to get tax savings, and it's actually doing the exact opposite. They're putting money away now when they're in a low bracket just to pull it out later on at a higher bracket, and it's just an unbelievable thing to me.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
now,
It essentially gave companies the opportunity to get rid of pensions, right? It provided a huge bottom line savings to to corporations at the expense of their employees.
and you know, I'm actually glad you brought that up, Brandon, because I've been working with government employees almost my entire life for 3 decades now. And they used to have an old program, Brandon, which you're familiar with. It was called CSRS, Civil Service. My father was under the Civil Service Retirement Plan, and then they changed it over to the FERS plan, Federal Employee Retirement System. And of course, when the government comes to you and says, "Hey, have I got a deal for you?" What do you think you should probably do?
You should grab all your money and run.
And run. And run, yeah. That's exactly right. And that's what they did with the ERISA plans and the 401k creations. They said, hey, the big government got together, the big companies, IBM, GE, even Kodak at the time, and they said, look, we're not going to be able to afford to pay these people pensions forever. We need something so that we can put the burden of retirement on the employee. And that's exactly what you just described, Brandon. The government and these big Fortune 500 companies saying, hey, we got great news, guys. We're going to allow you to put your own money in your own account, and you can put money in there pre-tax, so you don't have to pay any taxes on it later on. And you take all the risk and take all the investment choices in the world you want, and they sold it as a good thing. And what it's really done, I've just, in my experience, is it's handicapped people for retirement.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, it's limited their options and essentially kicked the tax can down the road, if you will. And now we have clients. I have clients whose required minimum distributions are over $100,000. What do you think that does to their marginal tax rate? It just puts it through the roof.
And that's just going to get worse. That's the other thing, right, Brandon?
Yes, because inflation is going to make that problem worse. One of the things that you'll notice is that inflation continues to devalue currency, but the marginal rates either stay the same or get higher. And so it's almost a 1-2 punch on your retirement accounts.
So what else has the Secure Act, again, that just got quietly sort of passed over Congress, approved through Congress in the fall, and actually put into place in January? What is really the big impacting factor? We talk about this at many of our workshops, but what is the really big impacting factor now on this whole IRA distribution and how to pass IRAs to your family?
Well, it eliminates the ability to limit your tax exposure on a non-spousal, if you will, inherited IRA. So that before, they used to recalculate the required minimum distribution based on the recipients, the beneficiaries, the non-spouse beneficiaries' age and life expectancy. And so that would dramatically reduce the amount of money that had to be removed from these accounts, while the rest was allowed to continue to grow on a tax-favored basis. And now the Secure Act has come along and said, no, you don't get to spread that out over your lifetime anymore. We want you to withdraw all of that money over a 10-year period and pay taxes on all of it within that same period of time.
And so this is one of the government's sort of first ways that they're going to collect money. They're going to say, hey, you know what? We want our tax money. We're forcing this money out. It's probably going to be at a pretty high darn rate too, because they got to cash out let's say $1 million IRA. The kids have to cash out in 10 years, so that adds $100,000 to their income every year. The government's going to get their money. And the funny thing about this, Brandon, is this law was enacted before the pandemic even happened.
And it was bipartisan support, right? I don't think anybody voted no on it.
So what are people really going to need to start expecting coming down the pike, in light of the pandemic and in the aftermath of the pandemic?
Well, once again, $2.4 trillion. I know that the House just passed another $3 trillion plus bill. Whether or not that makes it through the Senate is anybody's guess. But the bottom line is, in order to sustain this, it's what you talked about at the very beginning of the workshop today, is taxes are going to have to go up, right? And so if you can pay taxes now in a lower bracket and mitigate the effect of taxes in retirement, you're just going to be that further ahead in the game.
Brandon, I can't believe how fast that hour went by. These webinars
I went
really,
by
when you
quick.
have, I know, when you have good content, I mean, it's just an amazing thing. Just personally, I want to thank you for being such an amazing influencer in our foundation and continuing to help us with our educational programs. I know that you and your staff, and you have some really, really amazingly talented staff, you guys are going to make yourselves available to do webinars and teleconferences for anybody listening to this particular workshop if they want to reach out to us. You guys can reach out to us on the surveys, obviously, the feedback surveys. Let us know what topics you're interested in. Let us know if you want to meet with Brandon personally or somebody on his staff. Let us know if you'd like to meet with me or somebody on my staff. But, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are here for you guys in this time of sort of educational crisis. The more information and the more education we have, the more empowered we are to make sure that we can survive financially in the aftermath of not just this pandemic, but anything else. That God knows what could happen in what situation. I think we're all sort of realizing that we just need to prepare better for all these types of things. Brannon, thank you again for your great wisdom and your stories that you shared with us on this webinar. Any closing thoughts from you?
Well, I would just to add on to what you just said. The foundation, not only do we go into government agencies and workforces all over the country to provide good financial education from an employee wellness standpoint, but we do provide individual financial education and help with financial planning completely free of charge, no fees, no commissions, no incentive to direct somebody to a specific financial product. And so I just want to encourage the people that are listening to this webinar to truly reach out, because you are dealing with a 501c3 nonprofit organization that doesn't have a motive in trying to, they don't see you like as a dollar sign the way someone sees you when you walk into a brokerage firm or a bank or an insurance company, where it's, oh, let me see what I can sell you. And so you really are going to get advice without a conflict of interest that is geared towards your best interest, not the best interest of the institution that you're dealing with. And so please don't hesitate to reach out. Definitely fill out the survey, because we do look at those to see what topics are of interest to people. And then if you do want to meet with someone one-on-one, either via go to a meeting, or if you're in the Texas area, you want to come in person, we are open and doing all the sanitary things that need to be done to make sure that our clients remain safe. I would really encourage you to take advantage of that.
All right. Again, thank you very much, Brandon. Everybody, please stay safe and let us know what else you want to hear about. Introduce us to your organization. If you would like us to do our financial wellness programs directly for you guys, that is what we're here for. Thanks for attending, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jonathan.